Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the numerous paths Donald Trump has to victory, and we'll be analyzing which states he needs to win in order to get to that all-important 270 number. Now, before I get into this video, please do subscribe to the channel if you've not done so already. Again, I'm the only one who runs this channel. It's a small channel, so every subscription really does help me out. Now, with that being said, I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on that. Let's talk with this map here. So, as you can see, I've already assigned the majority of states to a candidate, right? I believe Kamala Harris is very likely to win at minimum 226 electoral votes. And on the other hand, I believe at a minimum Donald Trump will win 219 electoral votes. So once we have put ourselves in this position, we can see there are 7 states that are really in play for either candidate here. And so some of these states are more important than others just because of the Electoral College. And obviously, some states vote together usually. And now what you'll notice right off the bat is that if Kamala Harris wins Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, she reaches 270. She's the president. So Donald Trump needs to win one of those states. If he loses all 3, it's very likely he loses the election because there's not really, unless he, gets a major upset in New Hampshire or Nebraska's 2nd district, he's in trouble. So we know right off the bat he needs to win one of those Rust Belt states. And so we'll talk with those in a second. But we have to, kind of work from the beginning here because Donald Trump, if we're going to get him to 270, he needs to, really start by winning the reddest of these swing states. So the reddest of these states is North Carolina. Now, North Carolina is a state that voted for him in 2020 by around 1.4%. So it was close, but it wasn't raised or thin. And if you take a look at the polling in North Carolina, it does still show him ahead. We've gotten better polls for Kamala Harris in the past week, but he's up by half a point right now. So that's a good sign for Trump. And in 2020, he was down in the polls here, and he came back and won anyways. Polls in North Carolina historically show better numbers for Democrats than, is actually reflected on Election Day. And you look at some of the other polls we've gotten, Democratic Internal Commission poll has a tie race. I feel comfortable giving the state to Trump. It is, to me, the least close of these swing states. Now, on the other hand, I think there's another state that I think you could make a similar argument, but in favor of Kamala Harris. It's Michigan. Michigan, to me, is a state that she's likely to win. It's definitely not out of play for Trump. It's only a lean Democratic state, I would argue. But again, he's down in the polls to Harris here, and he's losing ground quickly. And the best polls we have show Kamala Harris at the lead outside the margin of error. New York Times Siena has her up by 4. Fabrizio and Lee, when they push undecided voters, this is Donald Trump's pollster. Donald Trump's own pollster has a tie race. That's, I think, realistically one of his better scenarios. So Michigan, I think, is definitely not a candidate here if we're giving North Carolina to Trump for that exact logic. So at this point, it kind of becomes a game of which Rust Belt state can you win? Because again, if it's not Michigan, it's got to be either Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. So it's got to be one of these states. Now, if you look at the polls, I can tell you right now what the polls think. The polls have Donald Trump down even more in Wisconsin than they do in Michigan. He's down by 3.7 there. Pennsylvania, he's losing by around 2.4. So Harris has gained rapidly in both these states, but it's actually better for Trump in Pennsylvania. Now, I disagree. I think of these states, his best bet is Wisconsin. Now, why do I think that? It's pretty simple. Demographics. Pennsylvania is around 7% less white than Wisconsin. And Donald Trump in this election is going to really have to win over white voters in the Midwest. In 2016, he did that. In 2020, he held on to most of that. He lost a little bit of it to Biden. His path to victory in the Midwest lies with white voters without college degrees. And in Michigan, he may not do enough with them to win the state. In Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, I think he can. That's why I think those states are more are better for him than Michigan is. Again, I'm not saying Michigan's out of the picture. I just think that at this point, based on the polling we have, it's a state that's leaning towards Kamala Harris. Now, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, on the other hand, these are states Donald Trump is competitive in. These are states that I do believe you can make a good case for him winning if the election were held tomorrow. So Wisconsin, because it's whiter than Pennsylvania by a good amount, I think that helps Trump. We also have to consider that Wisconsin, I think, in terms of metro areas, is a lot better for Trump too. The suburbs of Philadelphia, they've been moving left. In 2022, if you look at that Senate race, John Fetterman, I don't think was that good of a candidate for those suburbs outside of Philadelphia. He did better than Biden in 3 of the 4 main suburban counties of Philadelphia. You go to Wisconsin, their Senate race, Mandela Barnes, the Democrat, did worse than Biden. So I think the trends in Pennsylvania are better for Democrats. And again, you look at, Western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh came out big for Democrats in 2022, came out big for Biden in 2020. I've heard of it private. I haven't heard directly of it, but I've heard of it from secondary sources. So I, don't have full clarification on this. But I've heard from, people that there are bad polls for Trump going around in the Pittsburgh area. Whereas in Wisconsin, if you, talk about the momentum, I think the polls are better for Harris, but Trump world seems to think they have a better shot there than they do in Pennsylvania. And again, the polls do show a pretty bleak picture for Trump in Wisconsin right now. But again, you remember the state had the largest polling error on his behalf in both 2016 and 2020. It wouldn't be that crazy to bet on it happening again. I don't think it'll happen to the extent because, again, if you apply a 2020 polling error to Wisconsin from this year, you get Trump winning it by 4. I think if he wins, it'll be by less than a point. But right now, Kamala Harris, I think, is the weakest in these states just because of demographics. You also have to remember that Kamala Harris, as a candidate, she improves on Biden's numbers everywhere. I think we all at this point know she's a better candidate than Joe Biden was, and she gives Democrats a better chance of beating Trump than Biden did at any point in 2024. But here's the thing. The area where she improves the least on Biden is with white voters. It's with white voters who are over the age of 65. She actually does worse than them in the polls than Biden was doing, which is one of the few demographics where Harris is weaker than Biden per the polls. Wisconsin, as I said, is a very white state. It's also a very old state. Democrats need to win over a good amount of old voters to hold on to the state. In 2020, Biden did just enough to do that. Harris, if you believe the polls, does worse than Biden. And again, just to say one more thing about the polling errors here in Wisconsin, in 2024, before Biden dropped out even, he was still in a dead heat here. And I don't think he was, at a 50-50 race in Wisconsin. I thought he was going to lose by 3 or 4 points if he made it to election day as the Democratic Party nominee. So for all those reasons, I think Wisconsin is the best state for Trump in the Rust Belt. We're going to go back to the Sun Belt now. Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. So the interesting thing about Nevada is that, let's say Harris wins Michigan and wins Pennsylvania. Nevada doesn't really matter for her because as long as she wins one of these two states, she's the president. If she wins Arizona, she's the president. If she wins Georgia, she's the president. So Nevada at this point doesn't really matter for either candidate if this scenario unfolds. But again, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, Nevada can matter because then all he needs is it to win the election. But for now, we're going to likely assume Pennsylvania's still on the board because it's just such a close state. In Nevada, not going to talk about it just yet. So Arizona and Georgia. I think Trump's best state here is Arizona of these two. Now, initially, and I actually got a comment about this the other day, and I'll talk about it more in a video on Arizona. But Arizona, I initially thought was going to be pretty good for Democrats this year, and in the Senate race, that's kind of being upheld. But Arizona, was originally, I expected to be pretty good for Joe Biden. But if you look at the polling data here, it is a lot worse for Kamala Harris than Georgia. I shouldn't say a lot worse. It's not that much worse, really. They're pretty much the same. But the better pollsters in Arizona do still show a pretty close race, whereas GOP pollsters in Georgia have showed a closer race as well, which I think is a concern for Trump. But on a purely demographics level, I think the problem for Harris in Arizona is that Democrats in 2022 won because they got very good numbers of independent voters. Obviously, Kari Lake and Blake Masters were very polarizing candidates for Republicans. Blake Masters especially had horrible favorable ratings on election day, if you believe the exit polls. And so Democrats, on one hand, Republicans haven't won a federal statewide race here since 2016. On the other hand, they haven't really run into good candidates since 2016. So, that to me is a good argument for Democrats winning, but it's also a good argument for there potentially being an exception for Republicans there. So the polls, the fact they have it this close, I think at this point is a pretty good sign that Trump is still in play here. And Georgia, we've seen Democrats win here before, and we've seen them win against good candidates. Again, David Perdue was a relatively popular incumbent senator, and Democrats took him down in 2021. And in those runoff elections in 2022, we saw, Raphael Warnock win by 3. So Democrats, I think, relative to the candidates they're running against, have done a little better in Georgia. And it's just a state where broadly it's, there's a smaller range of outcomes. Arizona, you can kind of see blowouts on either side. Georgia, you can't really see that in a federal election nowadays. And I also do expect Kamala Harris to do a little better relative to Biden with black voters than Hispanic voters, even though we do have a lot of evidence she's gaining with Hispanic voters. And in Arizona, Democrats need a lot of Hispanic support, and Georgia need a lot of black support. I think I feel a bit more comfortable if I'm Trump, banking on continued improvement with Hispanic voters, whereas black voters in 2020 stayed relatively stagnant. So he needs one of these states, Pennsylvania or Georgia. What's it going to be? If you give him Georgia, he's 272. If you give him Pennsylvania, he's 275. So Nevada at this point is rendered irrelevant. I think from here, the best state is still Georgia. Now, to me, Georgia is a state that I do expect Kamala Harris to do very well in. I'm not saying that I'm predicting her to win it, but compared to Biden, who was down by 6-7 points here in some of the polls we got before he dropped out, Kamala Harris is doing very well. So if you take a look at the polls, they're pretty similar to Arizona. She's up by 0.3, but she, in the most recent polling, we do have pretty good, signs for Trump. Redfield and Wilton has him up by 2, and that's a nonpartisan pollster. Fabrizio and Lee, which is his pollster, has him up by 2, so that's not, amazing for him. But then again, we had a Democratic poll, only have Harris up by 1. So it's a mixed bag. Whereas in Pennsylvania, the best pollsters have all kind of moved towards Harris in the past week, just to kind of compare and contrast these two. If you look at Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris, she's up by 2.5, and Quinnipiac had her up by 3. Bullfinch had her up by 4. FNM, which is an in-state poll, which I'm a big fan of in-state pollsters. They had Harris up by 3, and Montesiana had her up by 4. And then you go to Susquehanna, or no, not Susquehanna. Here's Susquehanna had Harris up by 4 at the end of July. So again, a lot of this comes down to just how how much you believe the polls. The polls of Harris doing better in Pennsylvania. The best polls have her winning there by 3, 4, 5 points. If I'm Trump, I feel more comfortable in Georgia. And the good news for him is that if he wins Wisconsin, takes away from that Rust Belt firewall, even if he loses Pennsylvania to Kamala Harris by, say, a point, he's still the president, and Nevada doesn't matter. So that's Trump's best path to the presidency here. It's winning one of these Rust Belt states. It's likely not Michigan. I think Wisconsin's a bit better than Pennsylvania, but I'm sure you can make the argument either way. Winning both Arizona and Georgia. So that's what you got to do. You got to win 3 of these states, assuming you win North Carolina. If Trump loses North Carolina, he's in a lot of trouble. If we see on election night Trump's down in North Carolina early on, he is in a very, very bad position. But assuming he wins North Carolina, assuming no surprises anywhere else in the rest of the map, Trump needs to cut into one of those states in the Rust Belt firewall, doesn't matter which one it is, and hold on to Arizona and Georgia, the 2016 coalition. He's the president. So let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any states you think I didn't talk about enough. Let me know what you think about Trump's chances in those 3 states, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. Those are the 3 states he needs to win. So hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Hopefully you'll subscribe. And again, as always, feel free to comment down suggestions for the channel going forward. See you all next time.